Hello and welcome to the Animation Industry Podcast. Now, guess what? This is episode 199, which means that next week is episode 200, obviously. But that episode is going to be featuring a really extremely cute and special guest who is me. I have gotten a good friend of mine to interview me about my animation career, start to finish. Well, it's still going, so start to present, and all the cool things I've been working on lately. So I hope you really tune into that because I'm excited to share it with you. And of course, if you're a longtime listener of this podcast and you'd like to support it, I have started a Patreon, so consider throwing some change my way and help me run this podcast. The link is in the description of this chat. Now, this chat is featuring Canadian Director Andy Coyle, who is best known for his work on the Annie Award-winning series Hilda. And of course, he's going to be sharing all about how he got into Hilda, but something you may not know is that he's also released very recently his own YouTube series called Don't Walk Home Alone After Dark, which he created a brand new channel for and just uploaded the first video in the series and didn't do any promoting at all. And somehow the internet found it and now it's received almost 200,000 views. So he's going to share how he's been able to create the series completely in his spare time and how it's gained so much success so fast. So without further ado, let's jump in. Hi, Andy. How are you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
Great. Thanks, Terry. Thanks for having me.
Great. I was thinking of starting this chat with some kind of quirky, interesting question, but I don't think I'm going to do that. Right. So let's just dive in. So you are animation director on Hilda. You've been around the block around the animation scene in Canada. Where did this all begin for you back in the day?
Well, I grew up on the east coast of Canada.
Okay, like Newfoundland,
New Brunswick.
All right.
I know a lot of people who don't live in New Brunswick don't know where New Brunswick is on a map, but it is one of our Atlantic provinces, right beside Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia, and it is touching Maine in the US. So that'll give you a good idea of sort of where it is, and I come from sort of the North Shore of New Brunswick. And,
so very small town.
Yes.
Andy, watching cartoons, decides to leave for the big city and pursue animation. Is that the story?
Well, it's a winding story, but yeah, eventually I come to a point in my life where I have finished high school and am working just labor jobs and thinking, oh man, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. There's got to be like something better to be doing with my life. What do I like to do? And I always liked making cartoons. I never sort of thought of it that seriously as a career necessarily, until I was presented with that sort of challenge of saying, like, oh, I better figure something out that I like to do, or I'm going to be stuck, bottling water for the rest of my life. And so I just, at the time, it was the very early 2000s, and traditional animation was kind of on the decline, and there was sort of this burgeoning field of CG animation was emerging. Pixar had started to really become mainstream and big with sort of the idea of doing 3D CG animation, and then that had started to evolve, and I had sort of looked around at the landscape and thought, okay, well, if that's the way the wind is blowing, maybe I should learn how to do some kind of CG 3D animation. And I don't know if you know anything about CG, but it's technically complex, and the interfaces are just as much of a mountain to climb as sort of the artistry of it. And I did sort of get myself into that, and ironically never worked in 3D animation. I've always worked in 2D, which just was ironic because at the time also is when sort of the digital 2D Flash had started to evolve to a place where it was starting to be used for broadcast and starting to be used in much more ambitious ways than perhaps it was initially intended. But at the time I had looked at that and thought, oh no, like no way, that's never gonna, that's, you know, like I couldn't see initially the potential beyond sort of like the crudeness of what was being produced. But then just through some coincidence had been exposed to it, and it sort of opened my eyes to the possibilities of the way this software or softwares like it could be used to create really interesting, dynamic, artistic visuals that it wasn't necessarily quite so limiting as I maybe thought it was at first.
So let me just paint the picture a little bit more. You're living in the East Coast, you're bottling water as a job. Is that what you're doing? Labor?
That was one of the factory jobs that I had held. All
right, so you're working a factory job and you're thinking about your future and trying to figure out something better. And you're like, I had fun animating, so I'll learn how to Pixar animate.
Yeah.
And you're doing this like in your evenings,
Yeah.
like you're doing shift work in the day and then coming home and like,
yep,
you bought, I don't know, 3D Studio Max or something.
It was, well, you know, I don't want to admit to anything publicly, but there were ways in the early
Of course,
2000s
I was the same way, you know. I don't even know how we got the software back in the day, but it was gotten.
Exactly. And so, and I'd always like been making my own little cartoons.
I see.
And I had sort of, I've always been fascinated with the idea of animation in and of itself as a storytelling tool. Yeah. And so I was doing a real like DIY home process of like taking the glass out of like a picture frame and then like masking taping just printer paper onto it and putting a lamp between my legs and like drawing on it and doing sort of, and then scanning those pieces of paper into the computer and then coloring them. And so it was a very laborious, rudimentary process, but I was making these little, you know, what are now obviously like embarrassing cartoons.
Super creative, like where there's a will, there's a way. And also like you're doing laborious shift work during the day and then you come home and you're doing laborious animation at night.
And it was fun though. It was,
of course,
you know, it was part of just like experimenting with like, what can I make? And that's what I've always kind of been focused on, was the idea that the tools that are available and that are used to sort of create this stuff for me are more of like a means to an end. And so I've done a lot of different kinds of jobs in animation production, and I've been hesitant to really specialize in any one given field, because I find there are people who are like exceptional craftsmen and can sort of like dedicate themselves to becoming masters of a specific discipline, like designers that are just like really great at doing location designs or character designs, or if you're specifically an animator and you just love animating, whatever the discipline is that you really sort of like click with and melds with your personality. I find there's lots of people who get so much out of just doing those things. But I've always felt like for me, they were a means to an end. They were always just part of a process to like come up with an idea in my head and then be like, okay, how can I turn this thing into something that's going to take this idea from my head and then put it in your head? And how do I use these tools to be able to do that competently and clearly? And that was sort of the thing that I loved doing. So you end up like noodling around with so many little things, and then that leads to at least a small amount of experience in a lot of different areas, which you can then use professionally when opportunities arrive and you're like, oh, well, I can draw backgrounds. I'll get a job drawing backgrounds on this
Just
show.
give me some glass and a lamp and
I'll figure it out. Let me figure out what we could do. And I think I've always been sort of driven to be playing with the possibilities at my disposal to try and just come up with interesting out of the box solutions and communicate story ideas.
Totally. Well, one of those things I want to talk to you about, don't walk home alone after dark, I think is a result of that. But first, I often reminisce about how I discovered kind of animation myself, just kind of like sitting alone. I remember gathering leaves and putting them on a piece of paper and like lighting it underneath like you, and then filming it, and then like taking out frames, and then like just the most random experiments to try to like make moving images and tell stories and things. And the excitement I got from just exploring it for the first time there was like nothing that was parallel. But now where, I've been in the industry for a couple of years and I'm working professionally, like that excitement, the same excitement isn't there, but I'm always kind of still wanting to experience that. Does that make sense? Like I often go back into this like childhood mindset when I'm working on a new project. And like, I always find like the first, I don't know, week or a month on a new project is super fun because you're like exploring, you don't know how things work yet. And it kind of brings me back to that phase. Is that kind of the same for you?
Yeah, I think I definitely, like, for me, the most wonderful parts of making stuff are the very beginning and the very end.
Yeah.
And I feel like both of those times are magic. And sort of that's why you do the whole process. Is at the beginning it's exciting. You've concocted this idea in your head and you can imagine it and it's real inside of you already. But you've got to figure out a way, like, how am I going to realize this? How am I going to turn this into an actual tangible thing that other people can then have? And then there's this sort of like gigantic middle part where you start going, oh God, what am I doing? Is this good? Was this even good to begin with? What's happening? Why am I doing this to myself? And you start to question, your entire existence.
Yeah.
And then by the end of it, you come to the other side. And then when it's all said and done, you've created something and then you share it with somebody else. And then that moment for me is what is really awesome, is when you can make something that you can stand behind and are really proud of. And then someone else experiences it and they go, oh, wow, that was really awesome.
Right.
Then it's like, okay, I remember now. I remember that part of the process, that beginning phase when I felt that. And now I'm sharing it with other people. And it's a very powerful thing. And it's the whole, justification for putting yourself through something as laborious and tedious as creating every element of every scene.
Yeah.
And animation is such a complex art form because there's no captured reality. It is all of it contrived. It's all of it deliberately crafted. Every piece of every shot, every action, every movement, every sound, everything is brute force created, which is magical in the sense that you can really create a pure and interesting creative vision. It's also just incredibly difficult and time consuming.
Yeah, of course. I like what you said about the ending, because like that's a big part for me too. The kind of my heart like literally stops. I get like so much excitement. I'm so like ready to share like what I consider a surprise to somebody else. Like, surprise, here's a whole thing. And then like the littlest comment, like, oh, that was great, just like means everything to me. It's like, great, these years were worth it after all. I'm wondering though, as a director on Hilda, which is like super acclaimed, very beautiful storytelling, et cetera, that whole experience you go through where there's like the experimentation, the kind of like imposter syndrome throughout, and then the result at the end. How do you, as a director, make sure that a whole team is executing that original world that you have set aside in your mind, with the style, the type of storytelling, all that stuff in the beginning?
It's a difficult process. It's like, because especially in television where there's just so many moving pieces and there's so many different elements that are all happening at the same time, and you're trying to make a bunch of different stories all in different stages, and there's a lot of work that has to go into it, and it's not like an easy natural process to make that happen. It is something that I've had to learn and develop over time, just through experience, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't. And then also you pair that with sort of try to be as thoughtful as possible up front, and be at least convince yourself that you've got a good idea, that this is worth.
How do you do that? How do you convince yourself you have a good idea?
Sometimes you lie to yourself. Sometimes I don't know. I think you have to capture that initial excitement in your mind.
So if you feel like really excited about something, that means it's probably a good idea, and like capture that moment. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And hang on to that, because when things do inevitably get difficult in the process of trying to merge the sort of creative endeavors with commercial interests, that you hang on to that memory of what that was and have it be your North Star to guide you through the sort of labyrinth of making a television show. And that if you are any good, if you do have good ideas, that at the other end, those will come out, and then everyone else will say, oh, wow, that's really cool. And then you can start to refine that process and do it again and again. And more people will be apt to say, okay, well, if you've got a cool idea, then let's do it, because we've seen your implementation of cool ideas in the past.
I think that's a really good point as a director, because like, as a director, you're people managing, you're art managing, and you're always trying to push for the best ideas in everything to come out. So besides developing an acumen for knowing which are the best ideas, what you say makes you excited and to hold on to that, how do you get other people to trust that you have the best ideas? Like I know what you just said, where you said over time, more and more that people kind of trust that you're producing good work. They trust you with more things. But how do you start that originally? Because, every artist, there's a reason you're an artist, and it's because you want to create and you want to share. How do you develop the trust with people who have money to give you the role of a director, to say, not only am I an artist, but like I can make the best ideas flourish for this whole giant production in all aspects?
Yeah, it's a long process. It's not an overnight process. So if you're a young animator and you think, you know what, I want to direct my own TV show.
Yeah, everybody, I want to.
You're going to have to sort of be a little pragmatic and say, okay, then I need to start smaller. I need to figure out ways for me to hone some of those skills that I'm going to need when I get to that point, through sort of test runs. And that's a great way, like if you're working at any position in the industry already, is sort of like applying yourself and really focusing on what particular role you're fulfilling in any given production, and trying to understand it as good as you can, so that you get the context of that. Because that's what I think has been super helpful for me as a director, is having worked in a whole bunch of different positions and having a good working knowledge of what it takes to do all of the different bits that come together to make it.
So where would you say you're, being a director on paper is one thing, but where would you say that your actual, director experience and pathways started?
It absolutely started in my own personal work. And that's the thing that I feel, I look around a lot, particularly in the professional animation industry, and you've got a lot of people who I know love the art of animation, but they come to work, they work on their professional show, whatever it is, and then they go home and they just don't make anything. They don't draw anymore. They're not coming up with their own stories and things. I think it's more common than not that people sort of resign themselves to the part of the job that is less, I guess, romantic, or like the more sort of nuts and bolts of having a job and having to perform a responsibility.
Totally. It's creatively exhausting to work 8 hours a day.
It is, but I think that if there's a real value in keeping that fire alive in yourself, if you, and that's not to say everyone has to do it, because I think there's definitely a lot of room for people who are really professional craftsmen and just, that's just what they do. I think that's a really exceptional and admirable thing to do. It just isn't what I do. And so from my perspective, when I look at my path, really the beginning of it has always been that when I go home at night, I'm thinking up stories and different like little bits that I can sort of weave into making pitches for TV shows or script ideas, or just different, my own little short clips or whatever it is. I want to sort of indulge in those things, even if they never are realized, which I think people sometimes get caught up a little bit in this idea that like, oh, well, I started, but I never finish it. It's like, well, so what? Who cares if you never finish it?
Yeah.
The point is just doing it in and of itself. The exercise of indulging it is worth something, and you will learn and grow through that process. Even if you're like, oh, I have this cool idea for this shot, and so you start drawing it and you animate the first couple of things and then you sort of give up on it. Well, you already got that much out of it. You don't need to finish the thing necessarily to say, oh, well, I did, that's where I get everything out of it. You're gonna be able to leverage the experience of doing it. So I would definitely encourage people to sort of lean into that a little, make a little time for that stuff, just explore different creative endeavors on your own.
Would you say that you're somebody who's naturally inclined to do those things, or is it a struggle to be like, all right, I just got home from work, I got 8 to 10 hours, whatever it is at work, and I also want to create my own stuff and direct one day, so I'm going to push myself to get a few frames down on paper today? Or is it more like, I'm really excited to do this and I'm just naturally doing it?
Oh, it's both. Sometimes, like, you can go back and forth, right? Like, there's just different times where you are more amiable to doing it, and there's other times where you may feel like, oh, this is gonna be really hard, and I'm so tired, but that maybe it's worth it to try, and then maybe it's not. Maybe you just take it easy for a little bit, but there's value in it.
I'm just wondering, did you have this overarching goal that your personal stuff would lead to something more fulfilling in your professional career, or were you just doing it anyways for the fun of doing it, and it happened to lead to gains in your professional career?
Yeah, I think it was more the former. Not that there was no element of just sort of doing it and then separating my professional work and my personal work, but the aim has always been to be able to create personal work on a professional level for me. So there's always been some connective tissue there between those two sides of my work. But there has always, again, there's been jobs that you do where you're like, okay, well, this is a job and I'm going to do my best and I'm going to work as hard as I can work and try to get what I can get out of this experience. But it's not the same thing as like when I go home and I'm making my stories and I'm
totally
crafting a pitch.
I like what you said about your personal work being super professional, because every stride that has happened in my career has come from me doing personal work that I've just decided that this is going to look super professional, and then somehow through the magic of how the world works, it gets noticed by the right people who have given me opportunities to do more of that kind of stuff professionally, though, which has been amazing. So do you want to talk about your latest project that you just happened to publish on a YouTube channel with no views and no subscribers, and here we are 3 months later and you're at 10K subscribers and 150,000 views for one animation, one short animation?
Yeah, I think and this is a project that I really, it was something that I felt like no one's going to pay me to make this thing. Like if I try to explain this to somebody cold, if I try to pitch this,
Yeah.
that the reaction I would get from most people professionally would be like, okay, not really sure what you mean,
What's the
but
ROI
yeah.
here?
And for me, it was something that was like, well, this is the kind of thing that I would love to see. And if no one's going to be really holding those doors open for this kind of material to be explored, then I might as well just sort of find ways to be able to do it independently and not have to go and ask somebody permission to please let me make the thing that I want to make. Like it's one of those things where you're like, it's so frustrating in the world of television to have specific gatekeepers who you go to and essentially just get on your knees and be like, please let me make the thing that I think would be really cool. And then maybe someday, somehow, one of them might on a whim go, oh yeah, okay, you are allowed, son.
Yeah, right.
And so it felt like I wanted to do a little bit of an end run around the process, but that meant that I also had to be like very creative and economical with the execution in a way where I had to sort of make something that could be made by a guy in his bedroom alone, and wouldn't take 100 years to do that. Because as we said, earlier, animation is a very laborious process.
Well, every once in a while, somebody comes out with a full feature film that they've been working on for 40 years.
Yeah.
You could be that person.
Yeah.
I totally understand. And the watching it, well, why don't you describe what it is? Because for those who are listening that don't know what it is, like, give me a short synopsis.
It is the format that I want to continue to explore is a horror anthology animated storytelling series. Yeah. So just essentially a lot of limited but atmospheric and really deliberate compositions and artwork used to sort of perform the same function that you would in terms of like a traditional cinematic experience without having to rely so much on cinematic convention. You can sort of narrate some stories and accompany it with some illustrations and some fully articulated animation and some, like it's a really sort of like economic hodgepodge of different techniques to be able to achieve the effect that you could have the kinds of stories that you would tell around a campfire.
Yeah, campfire is a good. In my mind, I was going to say campfire. In my mind, it's like a scary campfire story that's illustrated, but animated, like a animated picture book kind of. But it's like for adults or
yeah. Exactly. I want it to be very broad. I don't want it to be ever too super adult in terms of like.
Yeah, it's not super adults.
It's not.
Like, it's not for 5-year-olds.
Exactly. It is serious and dramatic and scary and sophisticated and not. It's not specifically targeted at a younger audience, but it's not specifically targeted at an older audience either. I want it to have a broad appeal to anybody who's interested in those kinds of things, that you would get something interesting out of this series, and what essentially is right now just one story, because I haven't completed the follow-up story that I'm working on. I'm working on a couple follow-up stories, but it is hopefully the beginning of a lot of interesting exploration and fun to be had.
Did you so you made it yourself, but like writing is very, very difficult and pacing is difficult too. Did you do that all yourself as well?
Yeah.
That's
So
pretty
essentially, like what happened was the project had sort of begun because I was working so much. And
incredible. You wanted to work more.
well, I felt creatively like, it's very difficult in TV when there's just so much of the business and the logistics and the managing of people and teams and budgets and schedules and I just wanted something that was not tainted by any of those things. It was just purely about the sort of creativity of making it. I was just hungry for something like that. And then I had written this short story. And as I was writing it, there was these ideas in my head of like, I have these visuals in my head of what it could feel and look like visually. And then it sort of just came to me to say like, it could be a really interesting experience to just sort of try and see if I can turn this short story into a sort of short film. And there was a process of adaptation, where like I had written out the short story, never really intended for anybody to read it. But then once I sort of sat down one night and just recorded it in my bedroom and said, okay, I narrated it, laid that out on a track and said, okay, now how do I approach doing this? And started putting visuals to the narration. And then that necessitated sort of going back and re-recording certain parts and then cutting parts of the story out completely and streamlining the process to a degree. But it was just like a really like free and experimental process. It was just me fooling around.
Yeah, it sounds like you tripped over a rock and ended up with this thing on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. So that process of writing it and then storyboarding it and designing it and editing it and recording it and all of that whole sort of formative process was very organic and sort of me playing with all of those elements at the same time and cobbling it together. And then sort of from there building out more finished shots as I was going. And yeah, I mean, you just sort of like, I had sort of the rough block-ins of a lot of stuff. And then I'd finish work on like Friday and go home, spend some time with my kids. And then once everyone was in bed, I'm just like, okay, let me just crack open this scene and get a few more drawings done on it and see if I can slowly but surely pick away at this thing. And really, it was during the Christmas break of last year that I was off for like, I think 2.5 weeks or something also, because the schedule of the show and the movie that I had done with Hilda sort of just aligned in a nice way that during the Christmas break, I had a little bit of time. And then I found myself kind of sitting there going like, okay, well, I guess I'll just work on this thing. So I got a large percentage of it sort of just hammered out during the Christmas break. And then it was just one night I was at the studio and Heath Kenny, who is the chief creative officer at Mercury Filmworks, was just coming by my office to chat about something. And he saw some stuff on my screen and he was like, what is that? What's going on there? And I was like, oh no, it's nothing. It's just this little thing that I'm noodling around with. And he was like, oh man, that's super cool.
He loves that stuff. Whoops.
Yeah. And he was like, that's really cool. Let me take a look at that. So then I just showed him the thing and he was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And then, so he had offered to see if I needed any help finishing off the last, I had like 2 shots left or something that I needed to really finalize. And then there was the question of underscore, like getting some music done, which I had sort of resigned myself to having to provide myself or pay for myself. And then Mercury sort of graciously offered to help with some of the logistics of getting that sorted out. And then also my buddy John McKinnon, who is my editor on Hilda, I sort of enlisted his help while we were sort of spotting the music and sort of just trying to repace a couple of little bits. And it was just like just a fun little project for everybody to kind of screw around with. And then it was ready to go. And then we were kind of like, when are we gonna release this thing? And what are we gonna do with this thing? Because I had never really thought about like what is this for? It was just for fun. And then so in my head I was like, well, yeah, man, for me, probably should just go on YouTube to be shared with people. I don't think it needs to be turned into like some kind of business opportunity. It's just for the love of the game, man. It's like put it out and let people experience it. And then I didn't have really any expectations of anybody really caring all that much. I thought, obviously, it's not a known entity. It is just a random video on YouTube. And then people really responded to it and love it. And I think it's really cool. Just, I mean, in terms of the grand scheme of things, you're like, oh, wow, 150,000 views. It's like, that's not huge. But for me, it's huge when you're like, well, I didn't expect 100 people to watch this thing.
But it is huge from literally having no channel, no video, just posting it. Like, have you looked at the stats at all? Do you know the analytics of where these people came from, how they found it? Like,
yeah, it's all organic. It's like, and there was a really wonderful YouTube channel who does sort of like scary story stuff that had shared the link to the video early on, and that sort of helped get a little bit of traction. And I think once the YouTube algorithm had sort of picked it up, it's all organic views from YouTube's browse features and suggested videos. So it's like that's 99% of my audience is from that stuff. So it's not people I know. It's not people.
Well, I don't think 150,000 people. I'd be impressed.
So it's really, and it's not from like me sharing it on social media or anything like that. It is just people who found it, who thought, oh, that looks interesting, and then watched it and went, oh, that's really cool, I like that. So for me, it's been just such like a really fun process of having people enjoy the work. It's something I wish that I could just do all the time, constantly, and and just dedicate myself to just doing that. That'd be cool.
Yeah, well, congratulations, first of all. Now that you're going to be making more, do these thoughts creep into your head a little bit about the audience, getting more views, working with more people, like you said, with like, John and Heath and music? And
I think it has crept in a little bit. I want to make sure I maintain the sort of the part of the process that allows for the creative exploration. The collaboration is really great. I love collaborating with other artists and making stuff. What I don't particularly like is sort of the restrictive nature of like arbitrary boundaries where you're like, oh, the animation on shot 12 has to be completed by Thursday at 3 p.m. And in my mind, I'm like, well, does it really though? Because what if it's done Friday at
and then you stop enjoying the process.
Exactly. It's more about coming to the answers and experimenting and finding the stuff that I feel like is really creatively valuable than it is trying to turn it into some kind of like managed, scheduled production that like I just want it to be more about the making of it and enjoying the process of making of it, because that's the reason I started doing it in the first place, was just to have something that could be just about like what is best for the shot and what do I feel good about when I'm making the thing. Because it is really wonderful when you're doing something that you love doing and you're enjoying doing it. It's just a great feeling. And obviously, as you know, like working in the industry, sometimes you just feel like you love doing it, but God, you're really tired and you don't want to be doing this
Yeah,
right
doing it
now.
every single day.
Yeah. So, you just want to have something that you can kind of escape to a little bit
Course.
and play with. So, and so I'm not opposed to collaborating with people. And in fact, I've started already. I have made like a few little short vignettes that I haven't released yet with a couple of friends of mine
Nice.
that are more like little one scene animated short ideas. And so I've got them all sort of like in various states of finishing. So in the next few weeks, I'm going to be releasing a couple of those. And they are, I think, like, I'll tell you the titles. I'm not going to spoil anything, but the first one is going to be called The Girl in the Mirror. The second one is going to be called Dead End. The third one's going to be called, I think, My Stepdad's a Werewolf. And the last one will be called Don't Look Up.
Okay, so we have creepy, funny, creepy.
Yeah, it's going to be just really simple, interesting compositions with sort of like fully animated little ideas that I feel like are like great little things to tide people over until I can get the next sort of big story out.
You sound excited about them, so I'm excited for you, and I'm excited to see them. What happens when you release episode 2 or part 2 of the anthology and it gets 10 views because it didn't get the shares, or the organic Google algorithms, YouTube algorithm didn't pick it up, et cetera, et cetera? How will you feel, or how will that change things?
I don't know yet. I think like obviously it would be naive to pretend that like you wouldn't feel something. You would feel like, oh, that,
yeah,
great. But I think at this point, my head is so deep into like the making of it, and this new story, I just love it. Like it's such a cool idea that is tailor made for like this format and this audience, that for me, there's equally as much possibility they could do way better than the last story. I mean, it could do way worse, it could do way better, but right now I think I love the story, and it obviously means something different to me at this point because it's mostly in my head right now. And while the Pine Creepers is a very real thing that exists, and so maybe I'll feel differently about the story when it is completed. But for right now, I'm like so excited about this next story that I can't imagine even really caring all that much. But I know it would be silly to pretend like, oh, that wouldn't affect you in any way. Well, but it's hard to even really think about, right?
Fair. I mean, for me, it's kind of the opposite. It's a problem that I've had is every time I create something, the next thing I create, I want it to be better and bigger and more amazing. So everything I create essentially takes more and more effort until I reach a point where I'm like, to make this thing, it's going to take so much time and effort that I am almost like, I don't even do it because I don't want to start, because I already know the amount of extreme effort I'm going to have to go to make the next thing. So
I know what you mean. Yeah. I mean, that's a real thing that people have to deal with, I guess. And I think for me, again, I try to remember like that I believe in it all the time when I'm thinking like what are other people going to react to it? I don't know, but I know I feel really excited about it. And for me, at least, I can believe that will lead to, in some form, what I'm looking for, which is other people enjoying it.
Totally. Sounds like you have a lot of different creative goals. Like I know that maybe we can talk about this too, but you have pitches in various stages of development. You're a director, and you're creating your own stuff too. So sounds like animation really or storytelling runs your life.
Yeah, I mean, it is what I do, and that's the thing. I think like that's the core of what my vocation is, I guess, is storytelling, where I do feel like I love animating, I love designing, I love drawing layouts, and I love editing, and I love writing, but all of those things are all elements and facets of the process of getting to make something.
So let me ask you this, you've kind of talked about how the process of directing and, dealing with budgets and teams and gatekeepers and whatever, et cetera, kind of compelled you to create your own thing apart from all that, which is, the Pine Creepers, or the anthology, horror anthology. Why would you then be excited about pitching your own stuff if you know that it's going to end up in that, that gatekeeping budget process at the end anyways?
There is a part of me that, always believes that I can push the boundaries a little bit. And I don't want to completely discount sort of like the power of collaboration, like we were talking about earlier, where like when you get access to the ability to collaborate with so many people that are like professionals and incredibly talented, and way more talented than I am in a lot of these different disciplines.
Yeah,
I think that there's a possibility for that collaboration to bring something to the table that I could never make on my own. That, like there's something magical about that process, that it could be greater than my initial creative vision, that there could be a real contribution by others. Without the access to the resources of the industry, it would be hard to marshal that much
totally
work and have anybody be motivated to do it with you.
I mean, that 100% makes sense. I'm just wondering, maybe this is maybe a bold question, but why not push the boundaries with the projects you're currently on in the ways that you want to see? Or is it more or less like you need to start with completely different and new material to push those boundaries?
Well, yeah, I think and that's not to say that I haven't attempted to on the stuff that I am currently working on. It's just there's always boundaries to be pushed. There's always the next step you can take. There's always the thing that you can say, oh, well, if I just attacked it from this direction, maybe I could achieve a different result. And maybe I could make something that would be really substantial and something I'd be really proud of if I try different things. And sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't work. But I've found over my career in the past almost 20 years that the more you do that, it works out in your favor more often than not. You start to discover really like interesting outcomes that you would not have anticipated.
People know you as the guy that's always like, oh, here he is with a new idea that we're going to decline again.
Exactly. And that's what I even in the show that I direct and produce, Hilda, it's something that I have constantly done. The show itself has evolved and grown over the course of its 2 seasons movie, and now we're in production on the 3rd season. And it's always been a conscious effort from myself and all the members of the team, really, to be like, okay, well, we did season 1 and we were all really proud of it, and we thought, okay, that's great. There was no guarantee we were going to be able to make any more of this show, so we all put everything we had into it, and we tried it, and we made something we were really proud of. And then everybody else liked it too. And then Netflix was like, okay, well, let's make some more. And we went, okay, well, if we're going to make more, we're not just going to do the same thing over again. We're going to grow, and we're going to try different things. We're going to push things. We're not just going to be like, oh, well, let's do the exact same thing. So in the 2nd season for the show, we deliberately tried to evolve the production process, the pipeline, the creative endeavors, all of it, the stories that we were telling. And then we felt like, oh, wow, that worked even better. We felt really, really strong about it. And then they were like, let's make a movie. And then we did the same thing, where it was like, well, we could just rest on our laurels and be like, oh, we know how to do this. Just pump out the same thing again. But instead we said, well, let's refine this. Let's further distill it and keep tweaking. And then we did that. And again, every one of these times we kept not knowing sort of whether we were going to be doing more, or whether this was our big, moment to sort of finish it off. But then luckily, all of that stuff does really well. And so we're going to do a 3rd season. And this is, again, something that I've tried to evolve and grow and try out some different things and make sure that we're not just rinsing and repeating with the show, that if we're going to make more episodes, there's got to be a reason for those to exist. They're
Yeah.
not just a retread of old episodes. So it's something that I bring to all the stuff that I try to work in. It's just obviously, you know, there are different opportunities on different shows to try out different
Totally
ideas.
makes sense. Yeah.
And I feel like pitching some things that are deliberately crafted to excuse me, take advantage of that is something really interesting for me. Like even going in different directions, like doing a preschool show. How would you craft a preschool show that you would feel really creatively
Listen, I'm trying to do that currently.
yeah.
I see a big gap in well, I think some shows fill that, but like you hit a nail, or I don't know what the saying is, but you hit a soft spot for me, because I look at preschool and I'm like, oh, it's so formulaic. Nobody really cares. You know, they're just like, you look at Cocomelon, and like I have a niece, and it's like, oh my goodness, like the same stuff over and over and over again. And it's I think there's a need for something a little bit more risky, a little bit more fun, creative.
Yeah, I feel like that's what I want to try and bring to the table too, is this idea that you could do sort of these really impactful prestige shows that are just really, it doesn't have to be big. You don't have to go big scope. Sometimes you can go really small and really just try to be as deliberate as possible and make an experience that's just a little unique. And that I think there's a lot of value for that in the landscape of children's entertainment. And then also you look at like, you know, the adult landscape of sort of like primetime animation. That's the same sort of thing where you think there is so much room for different variation that would feel so fresh and have such value, where like you do see it sometimes on TV. Like my wife does character design on a TV show called Primal, and like it's something on TV that you watch and you say, oh yeah, this is so specific and appealing and has such a unique identity and personality as a show. And it's a small little production, but they do really amazing, beautiful things and different ambitious storytelling that I would love to see, not necessarily like a bunch of Primal clones, but just different
100%,
things, you know, like try out some different stuff and you could find some really resonant, powerful material that, you know, if anything does catch on, then people can start to lean into it and invest more and do bigger, more ambitious versions of it. But it would be really great to see sort of smaller scale projects done with a lot of heart and a lot of passion, 100%. Especially in features. You know, I feel like that would be great to get a more flourishing, small scale animated feature landscape that doesn't, you don't need $200 million to make an animated feature. That's just, you know, for me, it would make more sense to do $10 million animated features than to do one $200 million one. And at least then you can sort of see which way the wind's blowing on any given style or tone or
you need to go back in time to the 80s.
Yeah. I think there's potential for the future always to sort of push into those areas.
Of course, yeah.
But
I
it's
feel
just
like we're reaching a point where everything's so saturated, nobody cares anymore. Like I stopped seeing superhero movies because I just don't care anymore. I'm waiting for something to excite me. And it's like really tough to get me in a theater these days. Whereas like before I was seeing everything. It was super exciting, especially when the 3D boom happened. Every 3D movie was exciting. Now I'm like, all right, give me like, I don't really care. Give me something new. So I totally feel you. And yeah, we all need, like, everybody watches hundreds of shows growing up and in their adulthood, but it's those specific special ones that really stand out and you remember. And I grew up watching TV every single day as a kid, and I probably can't remember half of the shows. I need a BuzzFeed article to tell me what I forgot, basically.
That's an interesting idea too, because I do feel like people kind of look back on sort of past eras with a sort of distilled understanding of what they actually were, because the stuff that stood out, the stuff that had real personality and identity that really defined that stuff is so strong. but
Yeah.
I guarantee there was just as much sort of like disposable,
100%.
forgettable stuff
100%.
that everyone just forgets about. But it's that those like really iconic, lasting bits of art that
Right, like who thought some turtle
yeah,
superheroes
I know,
named
it's
after
crazy.
like the founding fathers of art and poetry and whatever were going to stand
Yeah.
out versus like the 100 other cartoons, and here we are.
Yeah, it's
like
something
30
that
years later still.
it really like there. I think in every generation there are some of these things that are peppered throughout, and it's
Yeah.
just up to the artists and creative people in the entertainment industry to just always be pushing for that as hard as we can, and that hopefully,
Well, the people who have the money they're not the creative folk, unfortunately, so it's always a battle.
and I've always believed that that's the way to the audience's heart, is making stuff that you believe in, that you feel like you
100%,
connect with and resonate with, that if at least you can check that box off, that you have the best possibility of being able to reach the audience with that material. And it's not going to be for everybody, but I think the alternative of people trying to mimic other things that have been successful isn't really ever going to result in the same kind of success. So I feel like the more we can all push for just making distinct pieces that have some kind of personality to them, the better off and healthier the entertainment industry will be.
I mean, I am all for that 100%, and I don't want to take up all your time tonight, but, it's been a pleasure hearing where your careers come from, the projects you're working on, Hilda directing, the horror anthology. Is there anything else that you wanted to share that we haven't covered?
Not really. I mean, let's think. We had, I don't know. I'm just excited about the prospect of doing more Don't Walk Home Alone After Dark, and having the third season of Hilda come out, and then
you've got a lot going on.
We'll see what happens after that, but I'm really excited, and I'm also just excited to see what other kind of new stuff sort of comes out in the rest of the industry. So if you hear of anything cool, let me know.
Well, listen to this podcast and you will endlessly find
absolutely
cool stuff. Well, Andy, super thanks for coming on. Like I said, I've enjoyed hearing all about it, and also I thought Pine Creepers was really cool. I had no expectations going in, and I listened and watched while I was working, and it was actually I'm super impressed by especially your storytelling specifically, because I know how hard writing can be. And for you to just come up with that on your own, I think that's amazing.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. That means a lot.
Well, and, thanks again for coming on the chat. And 100% I'll be looking out for more stuff from you. And if you're listening and you want to check out Don't Walk Home Alone After Dark, I'm going to include a link to the YouTube video in the description of this chat. And if you want to follow Andy, you can do so by checking him out on Twitter by kind of Andy Coyle. And I'll include a link to that as well. And that's all for now. So thank you so much for listening. Okay, bye. The music for this podcast was composed by Will Farmer and the graphics by Daniel Abensauer. I encourage you to look them up if you enjoyed their work.